He almost walked past her. In a city trained to ignore small tragedies, a child standing alone in the snow should have been invisible. Daniel Walker took 3 steps beyond her before an unfamiliar pressure tightened in his chest, sharp and insistent, forcing him to stop. He turned back annoyed at himself for noticing, unaware that this single pause would fracture the carefully controlled life he had spent decades building. Chicago lay hushed beneath heavy winter snowfall, the kind that softened sound and blurred distance. Michigan Avenue glowed under street lights, filtered through swirling white beautiful only from a distance. Daniel stood outside the headquarters of Walker Development Group, the glass tower behind him, reflecting power, wealth, and relentless ambition. At 45, he was everything the city admired. A disciplined CEO, a calculated leader, a man who never missed deadlines. Yet standing there, snow settling on his tailored coat, he felt hollow. The day had been consumed by negotiations, forecasts, and carefully rehearsed authority. Conversations about profit margins and urban expansion had stacked hour upon hour until time itself felt meaningless. His driver was late, trapped somewhere in traffic, and Daniel found himself standing still, watching strangers rush past. They moved with purpose, shoulders hunched, eyes forward, all of them chasing warmth, family, or obligation. Daniel realized he was waiting for nothing at all. Then he noticed the girl. She stood near the iron railing across from the building entrance, unnaturally still. Too small, too quiet. Her scarf was wrapped unevenly, her coat thin enough to betray its owner's optimism rather than preparation. A worn backpack rested at her feet, dusted with snow. She was not crying or calling for help. She simply watched every passing face with silent urgency, as if one of them was supposed to stop but never did. Daniel told himself this was not his responsibility. Someone else would notice. Security, a passerby, a parent. That logic had served him well in business and life. Yet his feet moved before his mind could object. He crossed the street, snow muffling his steps, and lowered himself to her level so he would not loom over her fear. For the first time that evening, the city faded into the background. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, measured, professional. The same tone he used to steady rooms filled with anxious executives. The girl lifted her head, and the restraint in her expression collapsed. Her eyes were red lashes clumped with melting snow and tears she had been holding back for hours. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering not just from the cold. When she spoke, her voice was barely louder than the wind. "Sir," she said, "my mom didn't come home last night." The words struck Daniel with physical force. His breath caught, and for a heartbeat, his mind spiraled through every disaster a city could hide. He forced himself to remain still steady, aware that panic would only frighten her more. This was not a delayed commute or a forgotten phone call. This was a child standing alone in winter, confessing something no child should have to say out loud. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she whispered. "Emma Walker." She pronounced her last name carefully, as if it mattered that he understood who she was. "I'm Daniel," he replied. "Can you tell me what happened?" She glanced down the street again, hope flickering and fading with each passing stranger. "We live near South Loop. Mommy works at the hospital. She always comes home before dinner. Always. Even when she works late, she calls me. But yesterday, she didn't. Mrs. Thompson stayed with me and gave me breakfast. She said Mommy was probably busy. But Mommy is never too busy." There was no exaggeration in her voice, only certainty. Daniel felt something tighten deep in his chest. This was not fear born from imagination. It was trust born from consistency, from a mother who never broke her promises. Snow thickened around them, settling into Emma's boots, creeping beneath the hem of her coat. Daniel straightened slowly, the weight of his world shifting. He thought of his calendar, the meetings waiting for him in the morning, the obligations that defined his importance. None of it mattered now. He removed his gloves and held out his hand, deliberate and steady. "Emma," he said quietly, "it's too cold for you to stand here. Let's make sure you're safe first. Then we'll find your mom. I promise." She hesitated, studying his face with a seriousness that felt far too old for her age. Then she placed her small, freezing hand into his. In that moment, Daniel Walker, a man the city believed it fully understood, felt something inside him crack open, and he did not yet realize that the child everyone else ignored was about to reveal how small his carefully controlled life truly was. Daniel Walker felt the cold the instant Emma's hand slipped into his. It was not just the winter air biting through skin and fabric, but something sharper, more alarming. Her fingers were stiff, trembling, far too cold for a child who should have been safe indoors. Without pausing to think, he removed his tailored overcoat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The coat swallowed her small frame, the weight of it grounding her, carrying the faint scent of his office, and a warmth she did not have on her own. Emma looked up at him, startled, as if no one had ever given her something valuable without being asked. "You'll be cold," she said quietly, concern flickering through her fear. "I'll be fine," Daniel replied, and for once it was true. The cold barely registered. What he felt instead was the sudden, undeniable weight of responsibility. He glanced down the street, then back at the girl beside him, acutely aware that this was no longer a passing moment. This was a situation unfolding, and walking away was no longer an option. They began to walk, Daniel setting an unhurried pace, instinctively positioning himself between Emma and the street. Snow fell heavier now, softening the city into blurred light, and the shadow muting the usual noise of traffic and voices. Their footsteps pressed briefly into the white pavement before disappearing behind them, as if the city itself was erasing evidence that they had ever been there. Daniel asked where she had been going, keeping his voice steady and calm. Emma hesitated before answering, her words careful, as though choosing the wrong ones might make things worse. "I was going home," she said. "I wanted to see if Mommy was there. But I don't remember all the turns. We moved not too long ago." The last part came out softer, almost apologetic, as if forgetting directions was a personal flaw. Daniel adjusted his stride, angling his body slightly toward her, a protective habit formed long before boardrooms and balance sheets ever entered his life. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to remember everything. You can show me what you do remember. We'll figure out the rest together." As they walked deeper into the city, Daniel asked gentle questions, careful not to overwhelm her. Emma spoke about her school, about how her mother packed her lunch every morning, even when she was exhausted from night shifts. She talked about pancakes on Sundays, about how her mom sang off key while folding laundry and pretended not to notice when Emma laughed. These were small details, ordinary moments, but Daniel felt each one land with surprising weight. This was not just a missing person. This was the center of a child's world. "My dad used to sing too," Emma added after a pause, "but he died when I was little. Mommy says he was brave." She said it plainly, the way children repeat truths they have been taught without fully understanding their gravity. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He murmured that he was sorry, knowing the words were inadequate, but offering them anyway, because silence would have been worse. They passed shuttered storefronts and darkened cafes, metal gates rattling closed as the night deepened. Emma's gaze kept drifting toward every face they passed. Each time someone slowed or glanced their way, her posture lifted almost imperceptibly, hope flaring, before fading again when the stranger continued on. Daniel noticed it every time. He recognized that look, though he had never seen it on someone so young. It was the look of someone waiting to be chosen, waiting for the world to stop, long enough to care. "How long has your mom worked at the hospital?" he asked, partly to distract her, partly because he needed to understand the shape of her life. "A long time," Emma replied. "She helps people get better. She says it's important." "It is," Daniel said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. As he spoke, a thought surfaced uninvited and unwelcome. For all his influence, all his authority, he had never felt this kind of importance before. Walking through the snow beside a frightened child, he realized with quiet unease that the power he wielded in boardrooms meant nothing here. And yet, for the first time in years, what he was doing felt undeniably real. The closer they came to South Loop, the quieter Emma became. Her words thinned, replaced by long stretches of silence, broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. Daniel could feel the tension in her small hand, the way her fingers tightened every time they passed a darkened alley or an unfamiliar corner. The city no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt like a maze. And Emma was afraid of choosing the wrong path, afraid that every step forward might take her farther from the one place she wanted to be. "This street looks familiar," she said at last, pointing uncertainly ahead. "I think we turned somewhere near the coffee shop. The one with the green sign." Daniel nodded without questioning her confidence, even though he could see doubt creeping into her eyes. He trusted her memory more than the cold logic of maps and directions. Right now, belief mattered more than precision. They turned where she indicated, and Emma exhaled as if relieved that the world had not punished her for guessing. As they walked, Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Whatever waited on the other end could wait longer. He focused instead on the girl beside him, on the way her shoulders tensed every time she glanced at the apartment windows above them, searching for a light that would signal her mother's return. The buildings here were older brick, worn by decades of winter fire escapes, clinging to their sides like tired skeletons. It was not a place of wealth or glamour, but it was lived in, and Daniel sensed the stubborn resilience of people who made lives here without applause or recognition. "Mrs. Thompson said Mommy probably had to work late," Emma said suddenly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "But Mommy always tells me when that happens. Always. Even when she's really tired." The certainty in her words cut deeper than panic ever could. This was not fear built on imagination. This was fear built on broken routine. Daniel felt a familiar unease settle in his gut, the same instinct that told him when a deal was about to collapse, long before numbers confirmed it. "Did anyone call the hospital?" he asked carefully. "I don't know," Emma replied. "Mrs. Thompson tried, I think. But she had to leave for work today. She said I should go to school like normal. I tried. I really did." Her voice wavered, and Daniel could hear the effort it took to hold herself together. "But I couldn't stop thinking about Mommy. So after school I left. I thought if I went home, she might be there." Daniel slowed his pace, kneeling briefly, so they were face to face. Snow clung to his hair, melted against his forehead. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said firmly. "You did what made sense to you." Emma nodded, though her eyes remained clouded with doubt. Children learned early that adults did not always agree on what was right, and she was already bracing for blame. They reached the corner Emma had described earlier, and this time her recognition was immediate. "That's it," she said, pointing to a faded yellow building halfway down the block. "The one with the blue door." Her voice shrank as they approached, excitement giving way to apprehension. Daniel felt it too, an unspoken question pressing between them. What if the door opened to nothing? What if the silence inside confirmed her worst fear? The stairwell smelled faintly of detergent and old paint. Emma climbed slowly, counting the steps under her breath, as if numbers might keep her anchored. When they reached the second floor, she stopped in front of a door, marked with a peeling letter and number. She slipped her backpack from her shoulders and reached inside, pulling out a key tied to a thin string. "Mommy gave me this," she said. "For emergencies. She said I should never use it alone if she's not home." Her eyes lifted to Daniel, searching for permission, for confirmation that this moment qualified as an emergency. Daniel met her gaze and nodded. "It does," he said. "And you're not alone." Emma unlocked the door with trembling hands and pushed it open. The apartment greeted them with stillness. No voices, no movement. Just the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the faint scent of something floral. Emma stepped inside, her breath hitching as she called out at Mommy. The word echoed softly against the walls unanswered. Her face crumpled, fear finally breaking free. And Daniel moved closer, knowing this was the moment everything could either fall apart or hold together. The apartment felt smaller once the door closed behind them. It was tidy, carefully maintained, every object placed with intention rather than comfort. A small couch pushed against the wall, a narrow kitchen table with two mismatched chairs, children's drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Crayon suns, stick figures holding hands, a woman with long hair and a smiling child beside her. Daniel noticed these details instantly, the quiet evidence of a life built around love rather than excess. Emma stood frozen just inside the doorway, her eyes moving too fast, taking everything in, and finding the one thing that mattered missing. "Mommy," she called again, louder this time, as if volume alone might summon her mother from thin air. Silence answered. The refrigerator hummed steadily. A clock ticked on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. Emma's shoulders began to shake, her breath breaking into short, uneven gasps as reality pressed down on her. "She's not here," she whispered, panic seeping through her voice. "She's really not here." Daniel knelt beside her, immediately placing a steady hand on her back. He could feel how rigid she had become, how close she was to spiraling. "It's okay to be scared," he said quietly. "But we're not going to guess what happened. We're going to find out." He guided her to the couch and helped her sit, then noticed a stuffed rabbit tucked between the cushions. He handed it to her without comment. Emma clutched it tightly, pressing its worn fabric against her chest as if it were a lifeline. Daniel pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up the dim room. For the first time that night, the weight of his authority felt useful. He began calling hospitals, starting with the ones closest to South Loop. His voice was calm, precise, asking the same questions over and over, repeating the name Sarah Walker, describing her job, her age, the fact that she was a nurse who should have returned home the previous evening. Each call ended the same way. No record, no admission, no information. With every polite refusal, Emma's grip on the rabbit tightened. Between calls, Daniel glanced at the kitchen counter and noticed a half-packed lunch bag, a thermos washed and drying by the sink. Evidence that Sarah Walker had left home, expecting to return. This was not a disappearance planned or chosen. This was interruption. Daniel felt a familiar shift inside himself, the instinct that told him something was wrong, even when proof lagged behind. He had trusted that instinct in business for decades. Tonight, he trusted it with a child's future. Emma watched him intently, reading his face with alarming accuracy. "You haven't found her yet," she said softly. It was not a question. Daniel met her gaze, refusing to lie. "Not yet," he said. "But that doesn't mean she's gone. It means we haven't reached the right place." Emma nodded, absorbing the words, though fear still shimmered beneath the surface. He dialed another number, this time the hospital Emma had mentioned earlier, the one where her mother worked. The line rang longer than the others. Daniel held his breath without realizing it. When someone finally answered, he explained everything again, slower this time, choosing each word carefully. There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice asked him to hold. Emma's eyes widened. Daniel raised a finger gently, a silent promise that he would not hang up. As they waited, Daniel's gaze drifted back to the drawings on the refrigerator. He imagined Sarah Walker taping them up after long shifts, choosing love over sleep consistency, over comfort. He thought of his own childhood, structured and secure, yet emotionally distant, and felt an unexpected sting of envy. Whatever was happening now, one truth was already clear. This woman was not careless, and this child was not alone anymore. The line clicked, and a new voice came on, measured and cautious. Daniel straightened instinctively, his heart pounding for the first time that night. Whatever came next would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line confirmed what Daniel had already sensed. Sarah Walker had reported for her shift the previous morning, worked through most of the day, then collapsed during her break. Severe dehydration, a high fever. She had been admitted immediately, too weak and disoriented to make calls. As the administrator spoke, Daniel felt the tension that had been coiled inside him finally loosen, replaced by a different ache entirely. Sarah was alive, but she had been lying in a hospital bed all this time, terrified not for herself, but for the daughter she could not reach. Daniel thanked the administrator, gave his name, then ended the call and turned toward the couch. Emma was sitting perfectly still, clutching the stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She watched his face, searching it for clues the way she had searched the streets earlier. Daniel knelt in front of her, steadying his voice before he spoke. "I found your mom," he said gently. "She's at the hospital where she works. She got very sick yesterday and the doctors had to keep her there so she could get better." For a moment, Emma did not react at all. Then the words seemed to reach her all at once. Her eyes filled not with fear this time, but with relief so intense it stole her breath. "She's okay?" she asked, her voice breaking. "She didn't leave." Daniel shook his head. "She didn't leave. She's been asking about you. She's been worried just like you." Emma let out a small, unsteady sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, burying her face briefly against the rabbit before looking back up at him. "Can we see her?" she asked immediately. "Right now?" The urgency in her voice carried a fragile hope, one that Daniel refused to let shatter again. "Yes," he said, "right now." He stood already, calling for a car, his movements decisive, controlled the way they were when outcomes mattered. Within minutes, they were back in the cold. Emma wrapped securely in his coat, her fear replaced by restless anticipation. The ride to the hospital felt longer than it was. Snow streaked past the windows, streetlights blurring into soft lines of gold. Emma pressed her forehead against the glass, asking the same question more than once, as if repetition might make it real. Daniel answered each time without irritation, anchoring her with certainty. When the hospital finally rose into view, bright and solid against the night, Emma's grip on his hand tightened, not from fear this time, but from hope that had survived the longest night of her life. As they stepped through the automatic doors into the warmth and light, Daniel felt something settle into place inside him. This was no longer about a missing woman or a frightened child. It was about the moment when fear gave way to truth and the realization that sometimes being present was the most powerful thing a person could be. The hospital corridors were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, the kind of stillness that made every sound echo louder than it should. Daniel walked beside Emma through long hallways, washed in pale light past nurses' stations, and closed doors past the muted rhythm of machines, keeping other lives tethered to the present. Emma's steps were quick now, almost skipping her fear transformed into nervous energy that pulsed through her small frame. She clutched his hand as if letting go might undo everything they had just been told. When they reached the room number the administrator had given him, Daniel paused for a breath. He did not know why his chest felt tight again. Perhaps it was the awareness that some moments carried a weight no authority or wealth could soften. He pushed the door open slowly, giving the room time to reveal itself. A woman lay propped against white pillows, her skin pale dark hair pulled back hastily, an intravenous line running into her arm. She looked smaller than the photographs on the refrigerator, but when her eyes lifted, something fierce and alive burned within them. Emma Sarah whispered disbelief and hope colliding in a single word. "Mommy." Emma broke free of Daniel's hand and ran forward, stopping only when she reached the side of the bed. Daniel helped her climb up carefully, mindful of the wires and tubes. The moment Sarah's arms wrapped around her daughter, both of them dissolved. Tears soaked hospital sheets. Apologies tumbled out between sobs. Sarah kept repeating how sorry she was, how she had tried to call, how she had been so scared. Emma pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, shaking her head, telling her it was okay that she was here now. Daniel stood near the door, suddenly aware of his own presence, of how intimate this reunion was. He turned slightly away, giving them space, though every word reached him anyway. When Sarah finally looked up and noticed him, her grip on Emma tightened instinctively. Her eyes flicked over his coat, his posture the quiet authority he carried without trying. "Who are you?" she asked, protective and exhausted all at once. Daniel stepped forward carefully. "My name is Daniel Walker. I found Emma outside my office building tonight. She told me you hadn't come home and I couldn't leave her there." He waited, braced for judgment. Instead, Sarah's eyes filled again. "You brought her here," she said. "You stayed." Her voice broke. "Thank you." Daniel shook his head. Anyone would have done the same. Sarah's gaze held as steady despite her weakness. "No," she said quietly. "They wouldn't have." A nurse appeared at the doorway, concern etched into her expression as she glanced at the monitors. Sarah immediately pleaded for Emma to stay, panic flaring at the thought of separation. Before Daniel could think, he heard himself speak, offering to make arrangements to cover whatever was needed. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Sarah looked at him again, something deeper than gratitude taking shape in her eyes. As Emma settled against her mother, finally safe, Daniel realized that something irreversible had occurred. He had not just guided a lost child through the snow. He had stepped into a life that had been struggling quietly unseen, and in doing so, had exposed a truth he could no longer ignore. Power was not what he had always believed it to be, and walking away from this moment would cost him more than staying ever could. The nurse returned with a folded cot and quiet instructions, her professional composure softened by the scene in front of her. Emma settled carefully beside her mother, the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, one small arm draped protectively across Sarah's chest. The steady beeping of monitors slowed, as if the room itself had exhaled. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. Yet he remained present, anchored near the foot of the bed, unwilling to disappear the way so many others had from their lives. For the first time that night, the tension in Sarah's shoulders eased, and her breathing deepened, guided by the simple comfort of her child's weight against her. "Mrs. Carr, Thompson was supposed to watch her," Sarah said softly, her voice stronger now, steadied by relief. I kept trying to get up. They wouldn't let me. They said I needed rest, that I had pneumonia, that I could not leave. Her eyes closed briefly, pain flickering across her face at the memory. All I could think about was her walking home alone. Daniel listened without interrupting, the image cutting through him with unexpected force. He imagined Emma in the snow again, small and silent, trusting the world to notice her. It was not a stretch to see how easily it could have gone differently. "You saved her," Sarah said at last, opening her eyes and fixing them on Daniel with unwavering clarity. "You saved my daughter." He shook his head, instinctively deflecting praise. "I did what anyone with a conscience would do." Sarah's expression did not soften. "Most people do not stop," she replied. "They tell themselves someone else will handle it. They keep walking." The words landed heavily, not as accusation, but as truth. She studied him, then really studied him, as if sensing there was more beneath the polished exterior. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you stay?" Daniel hesitated, the familiar reflex to offer a safe, impersonal answer rising to his lips. Charity, responsibility, courtesy. None of them felt honest enough. He glanced at Emma asleep at last, then back at Sarah. "Because I have spent years building something impressive," he said slowly. "A company, a reputation. And somewhere along the way, I forgot to build a life. Tonight your daughter reminded me what actually matters." Sarah absorbed his words in silence, something shifting behind her tired eyes. "Success without compassion," she said after a moment, "is a very lonely thing." Daniel felt the truth of it settle deep within him. He had never felt so clearly seen by a stranger. From the bed, Emma stirred and murmured, half asleep, "You're a good grown-up." Daniel smiled, despite himself, a quiet ache blooming in his chest at the certainty in her voice. He stayed until the room grew still, until both mother and daughter slept in synchronized calm. Outside, the city continued its restless motion, unaware of the small miracle that had taken place within its walls. As Daniel spoke softly with the nurse and ensured everything was arranged for the night, he understood that this was not an ending. It was a reckoning. The kind that demanded action, not reflection alone. And for the first time in years, he welcomed the responsibility that came with it. When Daniel finally stepped back into the night, the snow had softened into a quiet drift, as if the city itself were giving him space to think. He did not call for his driver right away. Instead, he walked, letting the cold air fill his lungs, grounding him in the present. Only hours earlier, he had been a man defined by schedules and margins. Now he was someone who had held a frightened child's hand and felt the weight of it change him. He stopped beneath a streetlight and looked back at the hospital entrance. Somewhere inside, Sarah slept with her daughter curled safely against her. That image followed him, persistent and demanding. For years, Daniel had believed control was power. Tonight had exposed a different truth. Power was noticing. Power was stopping. Power was choosing involvement when indifference was easier. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, ignoring the late hour. When the call connected, Daniel spoke with calm certainty. He asked for his morning schedule to be cleared and requested a meeting with human resources and operations. There was no room for questions. He outlined the beginning of a program to support single parents facing sudden crises, emergency childcare, short-term housing assistance, paid leave without penalty. His assistant listened in stunned silence, then agreed to make it happen. As Daniel resumed walking, memories surfaced uninvited. His own childhood had been comfortable, structured, and distant. Love had existed, but it had been expressed through provision and not presence. He wondered how different things might have felt if someone had stopped for him the way he had stopped for Emma. The thought unsettled him, but it also clarified something he had avoided for years. The following morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, reflecting off untouched snow. Daniel returned to the hospital briefly, leaving a card with instructions to contact him directly if Sarah needed anything at all. He did not linger. This was not about being seen. It was about being reliable. As he left, a nurse thanked him quietly, not for the money or arrangements, but for staying when it mattered. Days later, Sarah would call him, her voice stronger, steadier. She would thank him again, and he would tell her the truth. That Emma had given him something as well. A reminder that worth was not measured in influence, but in presence. That success meant nothing if it did not extend outward. For Daniel Walker, the city had not changed. The streets were the same. The towers still reached upward, indifferent and cold. But he had changed, and that difference would ripple outward in ways he could not yet see, touching lives that would never know his name. On a winter night, a child had been brave enough to speak, and a man had finally been brave enough to listen. He understood then that change did not arrive with applause or headlines, but with quiet choices repeated daily. The night had asked him a question, and he had answered. From that point forward, he intended to keep answering again and again without hesitation or retreat ever. From a psychological and social perspective, this story reminds us of a truth experts often emphasize. But society frequently forgets. Compassion is not an instinct that disappears with success. It is a muscle that weakens when it goes unused. Daniel did not change because he gained more power, money, or recognition. He changed because he paused long enough to notice a human need and chose presence over convenience. Research consistently shows that meaningful fulfillment comes not from achievement alone, but from purposeful connection. When individuals align their influence with empathy, their actions create lasting impact, far beyond a single moment. If this story resonated with you, if you believe small choices can reshape lives, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories exist because people like you value depth, humanity, and real change. And now we want to hear from you. In the comments, share this simple phrase, "Stay human."